Hey y'all, it's Dominique. Welcome back to Welcome to My World. You may have noticed that I have been somewhat off the air lately. That is due to the fact that I am recovering from an injury, and it has not been a fun situation. I'm sorry I've been gone. I know that I've promised you some interesting shows, and we do have some coming up. I've got a really amazing interview that I want to talk with you guys about briefly before we start the show here. I've got a guy who is a really big presence on social media who talks a lot about metrics and about memetics and about the forward motion that we are experiencing in this world right now. And he is absolutely right on point with some of his observations about memetics and how that's actually impacting our world. And I'm really very excited to do this interview. So some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about in that interview happens to center around the concept of accelerated social evolution and social media and how that impacts things, how it impacts people's minds, people's social development, people's emotional development, and how that 5-minute news cycle situation. It used to be a 24-hour news cycle. It used to be a weekend news cycle. Now it's basically like 5 minutes and then you're on to the next thing. And that does have an impact on people. We're going to be talking a lot about that. I'm really, really excited to have this guest on my show, and I think he's going to have quite a lot of insight into how memetics and how the internet and how social media affect the development of society as a whole. So, for today, we're going to be talking, and I suppose it really is along the lines of psychology still. This is a psychology podcast, but we're going to be talking about a really uncomfortable issue, but something that I think we all ought to know, unfortunately, especially people of color. And that issue is what to do if you're pulled over, what to do if you're stopped by police, what to do if you are targeted for harassment by police, or even what to do if you've committed a legitimate crime. Hopefully you haven't, and hopefully this is just going to serve, the greater knowledge for those of you who are looking to protect yourselves and who are actually being upstanding citizens. So I just want to put that out there. I certainly don't expect this to be used in any way other than to defend, your own right to travel the streets, travel the sidewalks safely, travel throughout your town, your state, the country freely, while being a law-abiding citizen, right? So just a little disclaimer there before we begin. But we're going to talk about what to do, how to handle the situation, because let me tell you, there's a way to handle being stopped or pulled over or even detained by, or even arrested, God forbid, by a cop, and there's a way not to handle it. There's a way to handle it well, there's a way not to handle it. And let me tell you how a normal interaction with kind of a scared law-abiding citizen goes. Okay, so let's play this out. Stick with me here. We're painting a picture, a little broad brush stroke here to paint this picture. All right, I live in the Chicago area. Let's say that you live, somewhere close to me. Maybe you live in Schaumburg, Naperville. Maybe you live in Cicero. Maybe, you drive into the city 30, 45, 50 minutes for work every day. Well, 50 minutes without traffic, right? 35 minutes without traffic. With traffic, it may be a 3-hour drive in and out of the city every day, one way. But I digress. So you're driving into the city or out of the city, as it were, for work. Let's say you're headed home after work one night and you're driving on a dark street. You're maybe headed down I-90 or the Eisenhower, the Kennedy. Maybe you're headed out of the loop, and as you progress out of the city, you notice more police cars. Obviously, you're just a law-abiding citizen driving home, but you happen to see the red and blue lights in your mirror. Of course, you think it must be for something else, somebody else, but you slow down a bit anyway and engage and kind of take, a moment and say, am I going to need to pull over? Well, unfortunately you do, because that cop pulls up right behind you with the lights continuing to flash, perhaps the sirens going off. And that can make for a scary situation. That can give you a bad moment for sure. It can give anybody a bad moment. But you pull over to the side of the road, right? You pull over to the side of the road. Now, of course, because you are a law-abiding citizen, perhaps you haven't had much interaction, thank goodness, with law enforcement in the past. You're going to want to do something like this. The police officer pulls you over. You're going to roll your window completely down. You're going to say, "Hi, officer. What was I doing wrong? Can I ask why you stopped me?" And he or she might say, "Well, what do you think? Or do you know why you've been stopped?" And you're going to say, well, I don't know. I might have been driving, 56 and a 55 and my mom called but I've got to go to the grocery store and I'm really late getting home to make dinner for the family. And you're going to want to explain yourself, and you're going to want to get out of that ticket because, hey, any reasonable person isn't going to try to detain, a full-time dad or a full-time mom on the way home from work, breaking no laws, trying to make dinner for their family, right? Right? Well, perhaps you say all of that and the interaction doesn't go so well. You haven't done anything wrong. You're not under the influence. You haven't stolen anything. You're not, speeding at a felony level. You are just going through your everyday life, trying to get home with those groceries to feed your family after work. Well, that's what a normal, reasonable human being would think. Okay, well, this person isn't breaking any laws. Let's let him go. This person isn't doing anything wrong. I have no incentive to keep them, right? Let's let him go. So when you kind of do all of these things, and when you tell your story and make the assumption that this person is operating under good faith, that is how you quickly find that these events snowball out of control. So let's say you did all of that. You rolled the window down. You went into your story. Perhaps you were a little nervous or shaky or what have you. You didn't think to get all of your stuff out of your wallet or your purse, your license and registration and proof of insurance. You're kind of just shaky and freaking out and, oh my God, I want this interaction to end. Well, that officer standing at your window unfortunately does have incentive to escalate that situation and to perhaps see if they can't get, not just a ticket or a traffic ticket or a light out ticket, like your headlights not working or your brake lights out, right? Perhaps they want to get a commendation, not get a demerit, and they want to go ahead and charge you with something like a seatbelt violation or a DUI. Well, then they're going to find reasons to do just that. So there are upstanding citizens who are police. I know several of them. I respect the police officers that I know that are a part of my life. I don't think they would do anything like this. But there are many, many others out there who would. And they do have the incentive and the culture supporting them in the police department to go ahead and make moves like these. So you might be sitting in your driver's seat and you've said all of that to the police officer, your window's down, you're being transparent, right? You're being honest because you are a law-abiding citizen. Well, the cop doesn't see it that way. He or she maybe has had a long shift, They're a traffic cop. Hell, life is probably boring for them, right? Being a traffic cop, being on the traffic, on traffic duty, being like a beat cop is probably not the most rewarding or fun experience that someone can have. And perhaps they want to get home. They want to finish up their shift. They don't want a demerit, or they want a commendation. And so they're going to want to follow that quota of like 1 DUI, 1 seatbelt violation per shift. Well, their shift is almost over. They want it to end. They want to go home to their family too. And so at this point, they've got a few incentives for kind of throwing, morality and ethics out the window and just saying, hey, I want to get off work here. I don't want to fool with this. I think I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to say that this woman or this man right here wasn't wearing their seatbelt. Nobody can prove me wrong. The cam can't see that far into their car. My dash cam can't tell whether they have or haven't been. It's my word against theirs. Well, they might do that. They might charge you with a seatbelt violation. Or because your window's down and you've been talking and maybe you're flustered and you're nervous, they might say, I notice you're slurring your words a bit, sir or ma'am. Gosh, is that alcohol I smell? Oh, it's not alcohol? Well, it's got to be marijuana then. Yeah, no, I do. I think I smell marijuana. In fact, I noticed that your pupils are a little dilated. Would you mind stepping out of the car for me? And of course, your pupils are dilated. You're nervous, probably about to pee your pants nervous, and having a mini freak out and a little meltdown there because of this scary interaction with a cop. So you want to follow instructions. You want this situation to end. And again, you're trying to still give this officer the benefit of the doubt. So you step out of the car. You go ahead with their question and answer routine. You go ahead with a field sobriety test. Just, because you want to get home. You want to make dinner for your family. And perhaps they want to do a breathalyzer test or a blood test. Well, you better hope you haven't taken a Tylenol PM 36 hours ago, like a college professor had recently, because when he was pulled over after breaking no laws whatsoever, the situation was caught on camera and the charges were dropped, although the interaction with police is still on his record. He was charged with DUI, so you better make sure you haven't taken a Tylenol PM in the last 36 hours. Maybe you're recovering from surgery or an injury, and a couple of days ago you had to take a Vicodin. Maybe you have a medical marijuana card, and last night or, 2 days ago you had some marijuana to help for your health issue. Maybe you haven't taken anything at all, and yet still the test can either be fudged or simply thrown out so that it's your word against the cops. So I'm going to ask you listeners out there, before I get into the scenario of what you should do, if you can identify what this person did wrong in this scenario. What do you think this person did wrong? Obviously, they were trying to cooperate. They were trying to make sure their story was told, that the information they needed to present got out there. But what did they do wrong? All right, you can sound off in the comment section, and I'm going to tell you now how a proper interaction would go with the police. So, again, you're driving home from work. You're tired, you're on your way to the grocery store, you've got to make dinner for your family, got to pick up the kids from soccer practice, whatever. You're obeying all of the laws, you aren't, speeding, and certainly if you are going 2 miles over the speed limit, you're not felony speeding at 25 miles or 26 miles over the speed limit or more. And perhaps you want this interaction to end. You see the blue and red flashing lights in your mirror, you realize they're pulling you over, you pull over, you figure, I'm just going to tell them what's up. I'm sure they'll realize that I'm not breaking any laws, that I'm not DUI, that I haven't, violated seatbelt laws, and they'll let me on my merry way. Well, you think that, but then you start going, but look, a couple of things have gone down recently in this city, or whatever city you're in. Unfortunately, I'm sure that you've got similar incidents to report in your area, as we do here in Chicago. You don't want to be the next Eric Garner. You don't want to be the next Laquan McDonald, right? So that is in your mind. Perhaps if you're a person of color or from a mixed background, you have heard stories from family and friends about how you should interact with police to maintain your safety, right? So although you want to believe that this person is a good person and that this officer isn't going to try to entrap you in any way, you're also just going to want to be very cautious, and that's in your mind. So as you're pulling over, you quickly get all of your information out. I'm talking your driver's license, your proof of insurance, your registration, everything. Now, you're not going to hand it right to the police officer. You're going to have it in your hand. Your hands are going to be on that wheel, right? Because you've heard all of this from your friends or your family members. You don't want to be taken as a threat. You don't want the police officer to think that you're armed or that you're planning on hurting them or anyone else. And so you've got all your information out. You put your hands on the wheel. You roll your window down, but you roll your window down about an inch, maybe even less. However much you can talk through the window without the cop being able to make up some, song and dance routine about how they smell some sort of a substance coming from you or your car. You're going to simply, when the officer comes to your window, they're going to approach the window. They're probably going to say, hey, can you roll your window a little bit further down? And you're going to say, I'm comfortable right here. And hey, officer, my phone's right here in its stand, and it's stand here on the dashboard, and I'm pressing record right now with my hand so that we can both have our safety protected. Then I'm going to put my hand back on the wheel. So you're being recorded right now. We're going to record this interaction for both of our safety. And you do need to announce that to the officer, unfortunately, although you're going to keep your back and forth and your talking limited. So you've got the recorder going. Your hands are now both on the wheel. The officer is going to say something like, do you know why you've been pulled over? You're going to say, gosh, I don't know. Maybe you could tell me. And they're going to keep asking questions. Well, you must have some idea. And you're going to say, I'm sure you know why you've pulled me over, and I'd be happy to know that so that we can both get on our way. All you need to say about the matter. They're going to say, okay, license and registration, please. And you say, sure, absolutely. If you could just articulate a probable cause for me. If I'm being detained, I need to know what law I've broken or what statute I've violated. Real quick, if you don't mind. And so the officer is probably going to be a little stumped by that. And they may say something like, well, I'm going to haul you off to jail if you don't stop doing that. And you're going to say, gosh, you're going to keep it respectful. Gosh, I'm sorry to hear that. If you wouldn't mind, all the same, please articulate that reasonable suspicion if I'm being detained. And they're probably going to bluster and hem and haw. And you're going to say, so again, am I being detained? Oh, I'm sorry, that wasn't clear. So am I being detained? Oh, I'm not being detained. Well, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show you those things. And they're going to ask you why. They maybe ask you, have you committed a crime? Are you planning on committing a crime? Have you been drinking? Have you been smoking anything? Are you taking any medication? And you're going to say, I reserve my right to be silent. I'm not going to answer any questions at this time. Now, if you do decide to detain me, I'm going to invoke my right to an attorney at that time. Am I being detained? Oh, no, I'm still not being detained. Okay, so then I'm free to go? Oh, I'm not free to go. The officer might say something like, well, we suspect that you're driving under the influence. You're going to say, well, great. So am I being detained? They might say, yes, you're being detained, even if you're not being detained. That is the point at which you're, again, going to say, okay, so if I'm being detained, I need to know your reasonable suspicion that I've committed a crime. And they may not be able to articulate that to you. So there may be some bluster, some bullying, and you're going to keep your hands on the wheel the entire time. Now, if this police officer says anything along the lines of, I'm feeling threatened, or I know you're planning on hurting me. I mean, they do say bizarre things to try to get you to react. Or if they start acting physically menacing in any way, you're going to say, officer, my hands are on the wheel right now. This video is recording, and I don't have any objects or items that could hurt you or cause anybody harm. And I'm asking right now whether I'm being detained. Oh, I am being detained? Well, since I'm being detained, I'm sure you'll go ahead and articulate your reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. I'll wait for you to do that. They may say something along the lines of, well, I need your license. I need to identify who I'm speaking with. And again, you're going to be polite, you're going to be respectful, and you're going to keep those hands on the wheel, not give them any of that information just yet. You're going to say, oh, okay, if you could just articulate that reasonable suspicion, I'll be happy to hand those over. And they may try to trick you into giving them your name so that they can record that there was an interaction or that they spoke with you. Respectfully, when I have interacted with police and haven't been doing anything, I have respectfully let them know that that is their job and that I'm not going to be giving them that information, but they're free to find it out in any way that they can, in any legal way that they can, if that's what they'd like to do. Now, that always isn't met with the best reaction, but I'm not swearing, I'm not being vulgar, I'm not being disrespectful. So, of course, you're sitting in the car, you've got your hands on the wheel, the video is recording, you're being respectful, but, standing up for yourself and asserting your rights. And this police officer may or may not at this point be kind of floundering. If they ask you to get out of the car, again, your answer is going to be, hey, I'd be happy to do that. Am I being detained? And when they say, yes, you're being detained, again, it's going to be, great, what is your reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed? I'm invoking my Fourth Amendment right. I need to know what reasonable suspicion you have that a crime has been committed. Okay. And they're probably not going to give you that. They may be forceful with you, but they're not going to give you that. And when they continuously refuse to give you that, it's because they don't have one. And so you're going to say, okay, once again, so am I being detained, officer? And if they continue giving you the runaround, what you're going to do is ask for their badge number, which you could ask for up front, to be just proactive about the situation. And respectfully and kindly, you're going to say, sir or ma'am, I need your badge number for the record. And if you could please call your shift supervisor over, that would be great. Now, they're on tape, their shift supervisor or commander is on tape, and they still haven't given you a reasonable, articulable suspicion that you've committed a crime. Perhaps they've gone through those tactics, like I mentioned, if I smell something or you're slurring your words, and you're going to say, great. So if you could articulate your reasonable suspicion that I've committed a crime, then I'll be happy to go ahead and go along with that, right? But right now, I'm asserting my right not to answer questions, and I'm asserting my right, my Fourth Amendment constitutional right. So At this point, they're either going to let you go on your way because you're not detained, and if you're not detained, you are legally allowed to go on your way, or they're going to call that supervisor, that shift supervisor, over. And at that point, you're going to let that shift supervisor know that you don't need to recap the whole situation for them. Again, you don't need to talk a whole lot more than you need to just assert your rights and say, sorry, I won't be answering those questions. But when that shift supervisor comes over, you're going to say, yes, I need to know whether I'm being detained, officer. Yeah, good evening. I need to know whether I'm being detained. Okay, I am being detained. Well, then what is your reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed? Oh, you need my ID? I'd be happy to give you that once you let me know what your reasonable, articulable suspicion is that a crime has been committed. Until then, I stand on my Fourth Amendment right. And to this point, and when you have really asserted yourself and respectfully let these folks know that you understand the law and you understand your rights in a Terry stop, they're going to 9 times out of 10 let you go on your way because they don't want trouble. They don't want somebody who's going to stand up for their rights. They don't want somebody who's going to fight this case and win and cost them money and time, right? So odds are they're going to let you go on your way. If they don't, and they, seize you or take you out of your car, that is all grounds for you to fight the case and win. But you're not going to resist. You're not going to be disrespectful. I know sometimes you're going to want to, but you're not going to use foul language. You're not going to name call. You're going to be as respectful as possible, as professional as possible. And you're going to use as few words as you can while still standing up for yourself and making sure that this officer knows that you know your rights and that you're not somebody to be fooled with, basically. So let's talk about what your Fourth Amendment right actually is. And in fact, let's walk that back a little bit and talk about what a Terry stop is. So a Terry stop is any stop where you're being detained but not arrested, or that there's a potential for you to be detained. For instance, whether you're walking down the street, whether you're driving and you're pulled over, these are Terry stops. So you're not being arrested. They're basically stops. It's Terry versus Ohio, and the courts have determined that, in reference to that case, that police can stop you without arresting you, which is, that makes things a little murky, but at least the Fourth Amendment is clear on what your rights are if a Terry stop should occur. Now, if the police really get raunchy with you and get real disrespectful with you, you are going to make it very clear to them that you do not submit to search or seizure. Now, I've seen situations that clients and friends have dealt with or at least heard of these situations when I haven't witnessed them in person, where the police officer started playing a real nice guy sort of routine. Officer friendly is what we call it. So Officer Friendly now comes out of nowhere and says, well, I'm sure you wouldn't mind, just so we can let you get on your way, if we were just real quick, just searched your car. We'll just call a canine unit. It'll take 5 minutes and you can get on your way. So they're trying to sound reasonable, and they're trying to sound like they know the law. Unfortunately, folks, it is perfectly legal for a police officer to lie to you. Don't take anything they say as fact. Stand on your rights, know your rights, and be confident in those rights. So you can't take what they're saying as being written in stone. You can't take what they're telling you as rote. You've got to be able to stand on your rights and know those rights backwards and forwards, inside and out, so that you are not taken advantage of, and so that you don't end up falling prey to a system that more often than not is here to harass and collect and exert power rather than protect the peace and serve the community. Now, if this officer does get a little raunchy with you, a little fresh with you, and either starts trying to strong arm you or play officer friendly, they rely on a lot of different tactics. That's why you hear about the sort of good cop, bad cop scenario. They rely on psychological tactics to try to get you out of the car, to try to get you, into their custody, to try to get you to submit to search, to submit to seizure. You need to let them know that you do not, up front would be great, but especially if they say something about, hey, we're going to search your vehicle, or hey, do you mind, we're going to search your person, and it's not just a pat-down search, then they need your permission, and you need to make it very clear that, hey, I don't submit to search or seizure of any kind. Now, this is going to be on that video for posterity, and that's problematic for them. So you're saying that you're not admitting to search, or you're not okaying search or seizure. You're not going to be giving them permission for search or seizure of any kind, right? Even if they're trying to romance you with it and, it'll just take a minute and then you'll be right on your way home. No, you won't. You'll be on your way to county jail where you're probably going to stay overnight for something you didn't do. So don't buy into the hype. Remember that police officers can legally lie to you. Stick up for your rights respectfully and assertively. And they have nowhere to go if you do that. Now, if you did accidentally say, well, I guess, or okay, you can revoke that right at any time. So let's say they've got a K-9 unit and it's getting all crazy up in your car, or officers are starting to tear your car apart or trying to pull your phone out of your hand if you're walking down the street and they stop you, right? Or pull your purse out of your hand. You can say, I revoke my permission for search and seizure. I do not give you permission any longer for search or seizure. So you can actually revoke that, and they have to legally stop. And again, it's so important to have all of this on camera. So I recommend that all drivers have dash cams in their car. And I recommend that all cell phone users, which is like 90% of the population, turn their video on at all times. It'd be best if you could live stream it so that they can't, get a hold of your phone, particularly one of these iPhone 10s where they can just show it right to your face and the phone unlocks. Turn the phone to your face, the phone unlocks, then they can delete the video. So if you can live stream it, and it's up on the cloud or on the social media sites for posterity, great, if you feel comfortable doing that. I think it's always best to protect yourself in any and every way that you can, because you just can't rely on, the hope that this is going to be a decent human being that you're interacting with. There's just there are way too many reasons, way too many incentives for them to not be that person. There are too many incentives for them to see you as like an enemy combatant and themselves as a soldier. Yeah, it's not really the case. Like, we pay your salary. You're here to protect us and to protect the peace. You're not here to line your pockets. You're not here to collect tax revenue, right? So making sure that you stand up for yourself is always, always so essential and so appropriate. Don't trust that this person is going to be a decent human being or an upstanding officer. You can't do that. And unfortunately, folks, cluster Bs, as we talk about quite a bit here on this psychology podcast, are extremely attracted to the hero professions. And the hero professions include police, first responders, so EMTs, fire people, emergency room doctors of any kind, politicians, and financial advisors and traders and stockbrokers. So, these are professions where these people get to be in the forefront. They get to follow their greed, follow their want for power, and especially those couple of hero professions that I mentioned up front are really absolutely filled to the brim with cluster Bs, like psychopaths and narcissists. So it's really doubly important that you stand up for your own rights when dealing with people that could be a cluster B, that could really be, seriously unwell and could do you harm. Now, we hope that these officers that you're interacting with are not those types, but to rely solely on that hope is silly. And unfortunately, we've gotten to the point where, people are being killed regularly by the police for absolutely no reason whatsoever. People are being attacked, people are being tortured, people are being, brutalized by police. And so we've got to be able to stand up for our rights. You certainly don't have to hate all police or dislike police, but you do have to be able to stand up for your rights. It's necessary in this day and age. So let's read a little bit about what your Fourth Amendment right is and what makes, seizure unlawful and what really constitutes a reasonable articulable suspicion that a crime has been committed. So, again, we talked about Terry stops. We talked about how the police officer or officers have to prove that there was a reasonable suspicion that a crime was committed before the stop occurred. So not during the stop, not after the fact, not after I find some kind of after-the-fact evidence to confirm my confirmation bias or to confirm, my hope that this person was committing a crime as a police officer. But it has to be a reasonable suspicion that's articulable, and it has to be something that the police officer or officers had before the stop was made. And so let's talk about the unlawful search and seizure and what makes, for a lawful and an unlawful stop, a lawful and an unlawful search and seizure. So the Fourth Amendment reads that you have the right to be secure in your person and your house and your papers and your effects. So essentially, just reading the entire passage here, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, like I mentioned, against unreasonable searches and seizures. So unreasonable, like I said, a reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been committed must be articulated, right? So, against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. No warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized, right? Kind of important distinctions there. Section 7, Article 1 states that no person shall be disturbed in his private affairs or his home invaded without authority of law, right? Okay. And then let's talk real quickly, again, just to cover our bases, about the differences between an arrest where, for instance, an officer sees you committing a crime, comes up, handcuffs you, puts you in the car, right? And a Terry stop where, because of the ruling in Terry versus Ohio, they're unfortunately able to stop you, kind of fish around for evidence, and then say, oh, but you know what, it was a probable cause, we had it before the fact. We had it before we pulled him over. So, yeah, probable cause. So, obviously, a Terry stop or a detention, you're being detained for a probable cause, is very different than you simply being arrested and taken in that moment because they've seen you committing a crime, or a witness has seen you committing a crime, or what have you. A Terry stop, again, is a little bit of fishing and perhaps a little bit of concern for public safety. I really don't know. I would think that it's a little bit of a fishing expedition more than anything. But basically, the restriction for the police, for all law enforcement on a Terry stop, is that they have to have reasonable, articulable suspicion that a crime has been committed before they stop you, before they detain you on the street or pull you over when you're driving, right? They have to have probable cause. They have to have a reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed and be able to articulate it. So that's what a Terry stop is. Terry stops are what officers often hope are going to lead to an arrest. But if you stand up for your rights, likely and hopefully Terry stop will not lead to your arrest. And, if it does, don't want to scare you, but if it does, you've got the evidence you need on camera. This is why it is so incredibly important that you run your video camera anytime you think you might have an interaction with police. So let's go over the whole not rolling your window down thing. I know that's kind of a weird procedure, but this is information I've gotten after speaking to clients, speaking with lawyers over the years, and after just my own experiences. Some have been really great experiences with law enforcement. Others have been absolutely heinous and totally based on just discrimination and harassment, and have been very scary and inappropriate. And I know that if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. I know that innocence is not a shield. It is not a guarantee that you won't be arrested or, God forbid, even charged with a crime. Now, the reason that not rolling your window, like I mentioned before, the reason that not rolling your window all the way down can assist you is not because we really think that your car does smell like alcohol or marijuana or what have you, but because if your window is your driver's side window is the only one open in the whole car, and it's only open an inch or a half an inch or an inch and a half, I say no more than 2 inches tops, it's going to be real hard for that officer to articulate a reasonable suspicion that they smelled some sort of substance that could impair you coming from you or anywhere in your car, because they don't have access to your car. Now, if your window's all the way down, if you have the top open, the sunroof open, they can easily say that they've smelled something. And yes, they will use that on an innocent person. Again, innocence is not a shield. So it's really important to make sure that you keep that window just cracked, just barely cracked, enough to converse back and forth when you are talking to that officer. Also, like I mentioned previously, you don't have to provide the officer with your papers. This isn't Nazi Germany. You don't have to pass your license right over, your registration, your proof of insurance right over to them the second they ask for it. You don't have to do that, okay? Really important information there. The time that you do have to do that is when they say, yes, you're definitely being detained, and here is my reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed. So when they say something like that, you really do have to sit up and take notice and say, okay, gotta give them my ID and all of my information. Right, Pebbles? Pebbles has a lot to say about this episode. So that's the point where you have to pass your information over. Before that point, up and until that point, where they have articulated a reasonable suspicion that a crime has been committed, You actually don't have to identify yourself. Again, I have used the words in the past in my interactions with law enforcement that follow. I've said, that this is your job. If you would like to determine who I am, I will leave that up to you. And I noticed that the officer in question was just stunned into silence, like, oh, shoot, where do I go from here? What do I do? She knows her rights. And they said, well, I need to know if you're on parole or if you're on probation. And I was like, okay, I'll leave that to you. You can figure that out. And again, they don't have anywhere to go with it. So they have to abandon that tactic. So it's very beneficial for you to stick up for your rights, to make sure you don't give them your identification until the absolute last moment, until you absolutely have to. And it's really, again, important to make sure that you go through this entire process respectfully and that you go through this entire process assertively. Again, we're not going to be raising our voices. Now, if you do find that kind of a clipped tone is accomplishing your goal of making them stop what they're doing and question themselves and become a little bit perhaps intimidated by you, great. But if that's not working for you, or you're seeing aggressive or potentially harmful behavior, you're definitely going to want to modulate your tone of voice, and you're going to want to carefully speak to this person and be very careful with your interactions. I also want to caution you against using hand gestures. If you're in your car and your hands are on the wheel, keep them there. You're not going to want to reach for anything in your purse or your wallet, reach into your pocket. This is why I say that even though you're going to want to not give them your, ID and information up front, you still want it handy because you don't want to be reaching for anything. You don't want to be reaching for anything at all. So, folks, if you have any questions about what to do in a situation like this, feel free to ask. I am not a lawyer, just full disclosure, but I have studied the law independently, just for my own interest, on my own, and so that when I have clients that need coaching on personal interaction, particularly those who may have to interact with police, for instance, for their jobs or what have you, it's a good thing for me to be able to coach them on and to assist them with. And it's also helpful just to know in my own life. Once again, if you're a person of color, if you are somebody who perhaps doesn't live in the nicest area in town, this is really handy information for you to know. And it really makes a difference when you stand up for yourself. The police will realize that you're not a target. So I want to thank all of you for listening, and I do want to thank the police who serve and protect us in a distinguished and honorable and respectful way, and who understand their jobs and who resist the temptation to give in to gang mentality and thug-like mentality. Because I understand that urge is there, and that can be part of the sort of office vibe or the office culture at your local PD. So the fact that you haven't given in and that you are representing yourself in the best possible way is amazing, and I want to thank you for that. And to all others, you're on notice. Folks are starting to know their rights. People will stand up for themselves in a respectful, authoritative way. So, don't target people. That's not an appropriate thing to do anyway. Shame on you if that's what you're doing. And I really hope that this has helped some of you to be able to stand up for yourselves. Thanks for listening, and as always, be well. Take care of yourselves.